Mike Bajakian just said something on camera that almost nobody is talking about, and I cannot stop thinking about it. Not because it was loud or controversial or designed to generate headlines, but because of what it quietly reveals about what's actually happening inside the Cleveland Browns quarterback room right now. Behind every rumor, behind every trade whisper, behind every hot take that gets thrown around like it's gospel truth. I've been in this space long enough to know the difference between a coach doing damage control and a coach who genuinely can't contain his excitement about something he's watching develop in real time. And what Bajakian did in that interview was unmistakably the latter. Let me give you the full picture, because context is everything here, and most of the conversation around this story has been stripped of it almost entirely. Bajakian isn't a guy who stumbled into this role. He's a 30-year coaching veteran who spent the overwhelming majority of his career at the collegiate level as an offensive coordinator before eventually transitioning into the NFL. More importantly, he's a guy who worked directly under Todd Monken in Tampa for 3 years, and that relationship is the entire reason he's in Cleveland right now. When Monken called him for this job, Bajakian didn't need to think about it. He described it as an obvious decision, a chance to keep learning from someone he genuinely considers one of the most creative offensive minds he's ever been around. He even went as far as calling his time under Monken in Tampa a re-education in football. Think about what it means for a man with over 20 years of coaching experience to use that phrase. That's not flattery. That's a real meaningful statement about how much working in that system changed how he sees the game. So when this particular human being sits down and breaks down quarterback play in detail, he's not doing it from a place of surface-level observation. He's doing it from a foundation that most analysts building narratives online simply don't have access to. The interview started with Deshaun Watson, and I want to be straight with you about what was said there because it matters for understanding everything that came after it. Bajakian talked about Watson's arm, his athleticism, the physical tools that everyone has always known are elite. But then he pivoted to something more interesting. He said the thing that has struck him most about Watson in their time together isn't the physical ability at all. It's his processing speed, his ability to take a foreign system, new terminology, different concepts and root structures, and translate all of it into something usable at a high level of speed. Bajakian called that the single most important skill a quarterback can possess, full stop. Not arm strength, not mobility, the ability to process. And he said Watson is demonstrating it at a level that's been genuinely impressive in their sessions together. He made a point of saying the staff hasn't been easing these quarterbacks into the offense gently. They've been deliberately throwing the entire playbook at all of them from day one, overloading them on purpose, specifically to see how much each one can absorb under pressure. Watson, he said, has been handling it like a professional. I'm giving you that honestly, not bearing it, because Bajakian clearly meant it and it deserves acknowledgement. But then something shifted. The interviewer moved the conversation toward the younger quarterbacks in the room, and I'm telling you, the energy changed in a way you could feel even through a screen. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, it was subtle. But if you've watched enough of these interviews, if you've spent enough time parsing the difference between coached-up coach speak and genuine, unguarded enthusiasm, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Bajakian's voice found a different gear when he got to Shedeur Sanders, and what came out of his mouth next is the part that deserves way more attention than it's currently getting. He said flat out, no hedging, no diplomatic softening of the truth, that he didn't fully know what to expect when he walked into this job. From a 30-year veteran, a man who has evaluated quarterback prospects at every level of this sport, across every type of program, under every conceivable set of circumstances. He walked in not fully knowing what to expect from Shedeur Sanders, and then he said he's been blown away by what he's actually witnessed. I need you to sit with that for a second, because it is a genuinely remarkable thing to say publicly, especially in the middle of an off-season absolutely drowning in trade speculation and manufactured uncertainty around this exact quarterback. A coach with 3 decades of experience didn't know what he was getting. And then what he got exceeded his expectations. That's the story, that's the real headline buried underneath all the noise. Here's where it gets technical, and I want you to follow me here because this is the part that really shifted my thinking. Bajakian described a specific play from practice, not a general feel-good compliment about work ethic, not a diplomatic non-answer designed to protect everyone's feelings. A specific play. He described a moment where Shedeur made a throw in practice that Bajakian didn't immediately understand while standing on the field watching it happen in real time. He said he watched the play live and thought, what is he doing? What does he see there? He couldn't immediately identify the logic behind the decision. And then later, when he went back and reviewed the film on his own, breaking it down frame by frame the way position coaches do, he discovered that Shedeur had read the safety perfectly. The safety had settled underneath to take away the crosser, the underneath route, and Shedeur had recognized that movement and identified the window opening up over the top of it before the play had even fully developed in front of him. He saw it before it was there, and he trusted that read enough to release the football on rhythm, ahead of the window fully materializing. I want you to understand what that actually means, because I think a lot of people hear that kind of description and it washes over them without fully landing. What Bajakian is describing isn't arm talent, it isn't athleticism, it isn't even football IQ in the general sense that phrase gets thrown around. What he's describing is anticipatory processing at an elite level. A quarterback who isn't waiting for confirmation before he throws. A quarterback who is reading the deployment of a safety, tracking a subtle shift in coverage responsibility, identifying how that shift creates a downstream opportunity on the opposite side of the field, and acting on that information before the window is physically open. That's what separates functional NFL starters from the truly special ones. And Bajakian didn't just wave at it vaguely, he described it in enough technical specificity that you cannot dismiss it as flattery. He knows the exact play, he knows the exact coverage rotation, he knows the exact moment the decision was made and why it was right. You don't fabricate that level of detail in a live, unscripted interview. That's a man describing something he personally studied on film, something that surprised him, something he clearly thought about long after he saw it. And let me tell you something about Bajakian's framing here, because the way he said it matters as much as what he said. He specifically called this kind of field vision high praise, and he explained exactly why. He said it's difficult to identify from the outside. It doesn't show up in highlights the way a deep ball does. It doesn't register in box scores. It doesn't generate attention on social media clips. It's the kind of quality that only becomes visible when someone who understands coverage and route concepts and defensive deployment is watching film with a specific eye for it. Which is exactly why there's such a dramatic gap between how Shedeur Sanders is being discussed publicly and what his own position coach is describing about him privately. The people watching from the outside don't have the tools to see what Bajakian sees. They're working from highlights and box scores and whatever narrative has the most momentum at any given moment. He's working from frame-by-frame film study with 30 years of accumulated context. Those are not equivalent sources of information, and I think we've been treating them like they are. Now, Dillon Gabriel came up in this conversation too, and I don't want to skip past that because what Bajakian said about him is its own kind of interesting signal about the internal dynamics of this room. He grouped Gabriel directly with Shedeur when he talked about preparation habits and professionalism. Both of them, he said, come into the facility every single morning and every single night already having studied, already knowing what's about to be installed before it's formally introduced to them, already having done the homework before anyone assigned it. That's an underrated quality that tends to get overshadowed by flashier evaluations, but it's one of the truest indicators of which young players actually climb depth charts and which ones get stuck. You don't out-talent your way into a coaching staff's trust, you out-prepare your way there. And apparently both Shedeur and Gabriel are doing exactly that on a daily basis, consistently enough that their position coach is specifically choosing to highlight it in a public interview. Dillon Gabe was described in noticeably different terms, which is itself informative. Bajakian called him a unicorn in terms of raw physical tools, acknowledged some mechanical rawness that comes with being new to this level, and talked about the clay that's still being shaped. A totally different developmental track, a totally different kind of project. And the fact that Bajakian drew that distinction so clearly between Gabe on one end and Shedeur and Gabriel on the other tells you something real about where the internal hierarchy of this room actually sits right now, separate from everything being speculated about online. But here's the thing I cannot get past. The thing that keeps pulling me back every time I try to move on to the next story. All of this trade speculation, all of these persistent whispers about Shedeur Sanders supposedly being unhappy in Cleveland, supposedly wanting out, supposedly being available if the right deal materializes. None of it lines up with what his quarterback coach is describing. None of it. And I'm not talking about a slight misalignment or a narrative that's slightly off in one direction. I'm talking about a near-total contradiction between what's being discussed externally and what the person with the most direct, most detailed access to the actual reality is choosing to say on camera. Coaches are careful in these settings. I've been watching these interviews for years and I understand the genre intimately. They choose their words deliberately. They hedge where hedging is necessary. They protect their players when protection is warranted. But they also don't go out of their way to provide specific technical examples from practice film about players who are disengaged or checked out or mentally somewhere else. They don't describe the anticipatory processing of a quarterback who supposedly wants to be traded somewhere else. They don't call specific reads elite-level praise for a player they're quietly trying to move. If Bajakian wanted to give a safe, forgettable, says-nothing answer about Shedeur Sanders, he absolutely could have. Instead, he told a story. A detailed, specific, technically grounded story about a play that surprised him. That's not diplomacy. That's a coach who's genuinely excited about what he's watching and who decided, maybe without even fully calculating the implications, to let that excitement show publicly. I also want to spend a moment on something Bajakian said about the broader culture inside that quarterback room, because it tells a meaningful story about the kind of environment these young quarterbacks are actually developing inside. He described the room as conversational, collaborative, not a hierarchy where one voice speaks and everyone else absorbs instructions in silence. He brings his assistant quarterbacks coach into the discussions. He brings quality control staff. He actively invites Watson's NFL experience into the conversation about how certain concepts should be executed. He invites Shedeur's read on a particular play structure. He invites Gabriel's perspective shaped by his own distinct college background. The idea is that the best answer about how to run a given concept might come from anyone in the room, and everyone's input is genuinely considered. For young quarterbacks still finding their footing at this level, that kind of environment isn't just pleasant. It's accelerating. You develop faster when you're being asked how you see the field rather than simply being told where to look. The confidence that comes from having your football intelligence genuinely engaged rather than just tolerated changes how you carry yourself in a huddle. It changes how quickly your instincts sharpen. And apparently, for Shedeur Sanders specifically, those instincts are already sharpening at a rate that's catching his own coach off guard. Here's where I land on all of this, and I want to be precise about it rather than turning it into something bigger than it is. The quarterback competition in Cleveland is real. I'm not pretending it's been decided before training camp has even opened. Watson's experience matters. The investments the organization has made, financial and otherwise, matter. Nobody serious is declaring a winner before a single meaningful rep has been taken under real competitive conditions. That would be irresponsible, and I'm not doing it. But what I am saying, clearly and without hesitation, is that the story being told outside that building does not match the story being told by the man inside it who knows the most. And when those two stories diverge this dramatically, I've learned to pay much closer attention to the one coming from the person with the clearest view. Shedeur Sanders is not a player hanging on by a thread in this quarterback room. He's not a player whose head is somewhere else, whose focus has drifted toward trade possibilities and relocation scenarios. What his quarterback coach is describing is a player who comes in early, stays late, already knows the playbook before it's been formally installed, and then goes out onto that practice field and makes throws that make his 30-year veteran coach go back to the film room afterward to understand what he actually just witnessed. That's not a player on his way out the door. That's a player quietly, methodically building towards something. The outside noise has been so loud for so long that it's become easy to forget to actually listen to the people inside the building. Bajakian just gave us a rare, unguarded window into what's actually happening in there. The picture it paints is considerably more interesting than anything the rumor cycle has been offering.